hear you. I hear you. You want to say any more, Maria?
No.
So welcome, everyone. I am glad you have joined us this evening. My name is Catherine Alder from the Ainsworth UCC Peace Team and Central Pacific Conference Palestine-Israel Network. Those two groups have planned this evening's and this series. First in our series, we listened to how Jesus was always talking about apartheid, preached by American Jew and author Mark Braverman. Then we learned from Omar Shaker from the Human Rights Watch and two recent Tree of Life travelers, Muhammad Ali and Fatima Ali, about the conditions on the ground that they saw. And tonight's session is so important because we're going to learn about what we can do about what is going on there in this state that, if it is an apartheid, we need to step up and do something about. This webinar is being recorded, and the 3 sessions will be on the Ainsworth UCC channel of YouTube for you to share. Our country is greatly invested in supporting Israel. So the question is, should our tax dollars go there if indeed Israel is an apartheid? Also, there has to be hope and action looking at this situation. I have done many conferences and events, and I always feel it's very important, and our group does as well, that we leave people feeling like they can do something and not hopeless. So tonight we will share some actions that you can take. We work to plan these events, partly to honor those on both sides of the wall who really want peace with justice. And before this started, we've just listened to one person who's really begging for that to happen. My friend Maria Corey from Palestine. So now I want to introduce our panelists who've just come back from Palestine, Israel. First one I want to introduce is Dovbaum, who's a PhD and an Israeli Jew, director of American Friends Service Committee Economic Activism Program. The program supports efforts to expose corporate involvement in state violence and human rights violations. Dov is a feminist activist and a scholar who has taught about militarism and the global economy from a feminist perspective in Israeli and US universities. She's the co-founder of Who Profits from Occupation. You can look that up and find out that information. And of the Coalition of Women for Peace in Israel. So Dov, can you just say hi so people can see you on screen for a second?
Oh, hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And our second panelist is Reverend Dr. Allison Tanner. She's the new national organizer for Apartheid-Free Churches and Communities Initiative. She's a pastor, educator, and organizer working for justice and healing in her community. She serves as the pastor of Public Witness at Lakeshore Avenue Baptist Church in Oakland, as well as the convener of the Justice for Palestine and Israel community of the Alliance of Baptists. So Allison, could you say hi as well?
Hello, all. Good to be with you.
Thank you. So I want to welcome our panelists. And then I want to ask people about the chat box. Please keep your comments to a minimum in the chat box because we're going to try to pick up questions throughout the evening that Beverly Pertu will be reading. Beverly Pertu will be reading them and then picking the ones that we can ask. We can't read them all. We can't do them all. Dave Sutton, would you please highlight David Nichols' rainbow there? We're going to now see a movie called Amnesty International Report Finds Israel Guilty of Enforcing Apartheid on Palestinians. If you will highlight his box. so he can show the movie. There.
People can do that by going.
Saleh Hijazi, Amnesty International's Deputy Regional Director of the Middle East and North Africa region and head of Amnesty International's Jerusalem office, is in South Africa and will be addressing Israel apartheid against Palestinians, a cruel system of domination and crimes against humanity launched tomorrow at the University of Pretoria. And she joins us now via Zoom. He joins us now via Zoom to tell us a little bit more about this visit. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so this must be a pretty important report for you to come all the way to South Africa to launch.
Well, I'm here in South Africa and other colleagues are all around the world. It is an important report because it does expose that the crime against humanity, a crime against humanity of apartheid is being perpetrated by Israel against Palestinians wherever Israel controls the rights of Palestinians in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. This system of oppression and domination it consists of four main pillars. It is the fragmentation of Palestinian communities into different geographic areas. It is the segregation within these areas and the violent control of them. It is the dispossession of landed property and the deprivation of basic rights. This system of oppression and domination amounting to apartheid has a clear intent that the report documents in statements by Israeli officials, but also in how this intent is reflected in laws, policies, and practices, where it is to maintain Jewish hegemony, Jewish Israeli hegemony, both in terms of demography and geography, wherever Israel exerts control over land, meaning to have Jewish Israelis as the majority in the population, and for that majority to control maximum amount of land. Now, to maintain this system, Israel also perpetrates crimes that are defined under international law as crimes against humanity, including forced transfer, which include under it home demolitions, forced evictions, and the creation of coercive environments to push Palestinians out of this territory, decrease the number of Palestinians, but also the use of arbitrary detention and torture, the use of unlawful killings, and the use of persecution against Palestinians. Therefore, Israel, in committing these crimes to maintain this system of oppression and domination, is committing the crime against humanity of apartheid. This can be seen, for example, in the Naqab, where Palestinian Bedouins there hold Israeli citizenship, but they're treated as second or third class citizen as compared to their Jewish counterparts. They live in, many of them live in what is called unrecognized villages. The Israeli state does not recognize these villages, does not provide them electricity, does not provide them with water, education, or any of the basic services, and have continuously demolished their homes, forcibly moving them out of these areas. Now, it's important to note that these communities have been already forcibly displaced in 1948 and around the time that Israel was established in what Palestinians call a Nakba, where there was ethnic cleansing and forced displacement of hundreds and thousands of Palestinians. That was an essential act of fragmentation. So many of these peoples have been displaced one or two times, and now many of them, thousands of them, are facing the threat of a forcible displacement again. There are 150,000 Palestinians currently living under the threat of either losing their home or being forcibly evicted out of their home. Jewish Israelis do not face this reality. In the Naqab, for example, Jewish farms that are owned by single families are provided hundreds of dunums, massive amount of land. They're provided water, they're provided electricity, they're connected to the infrastructure. They have polling stations, for example, closer to them. And although these Palestinians and the Naqab are citizens, they're not even provided the infrastructure so that they can practice their right to political participation.
All right.
This image that is in Naqab, is reflected elsewhere.
All right, so let's unpack some of this. I mean, we use the word apartheid, and so help our viewers, particularly here in South Africa. Our understanding here was being sent to homelands, Bantustans, and you couldn't leave there without permission, and you needed a special pass to travel and work in certain areas. Certain job opportunities were denied to you, and all of this was based on the color of your skin and your ethnicity. Is this what we're seeing in Israel, Palestine?
Indeed, this is part of the system, but not the entirety of it. There are many comparisons with South Africa, but there are also many differences. Take the Gaza Strip, for example. It has been called by the UN as the largest open prison in the world. People there have, since 2007, been placed under an illegal military blockade that amounts to collective punishment. They cannot leave the territory. They cannot visit family that are in other parts of the occupied Palestinian territories, like in the West Bank. They cannot leave for education. They cannot trade, they cannot move in goods and services, goods in or out of the Gaza Strip. Fishermen are allowed just a few nautical miles, which will not allow them to basically get any fish. Farmers are not allowed to use lands because they're called buffer zones. So this is Gaza is a stark example of what, using South African terminology would be called the Bantustan. And actually, a partner organization, Al Mizan, have put out a report at the end of last year called the Gaza Bantustan, basically using the apartheid legal analysis to explain the situation in Gaza. But the situation is also similar in elsewhere. Palestinian citizens of Israel, like, for example, I mentioned the Palestinian Bedouins and the Naqab, are forced into these segregated community. They're inside an area called the Siyaj, where, all right, their rights are not as violently controlled as those in Gaza, but they still face severe restrictions when it comes to the enjoyment of their rights as compared to Jewish Israeli citizens of Israel. Palestinians in the West Bank are also kept into segregated areas in between illegal settlements that amount to war crimes and have there are more than 100 checkpoints that control their freedom of movement. Palestinians in East Jerusalem, one-third of them, the 300,000, one-third of them live behind what is called the separation. Palestinians call the segregation wall, a separation wall that is a military structure, military checkpoints that violently control their freedom of movement. Which, of course, as you know, controlling freedom of movement also affects your right to work, right to education, right to be with the family, and this is all because you are Palestinian. Because Jewish Israelis don't face that. Jewish Israelis are able to move freely within the country. They're free to work in whatever profession they want. They're provided education. They can travel in and outside of the country freely. The difference and the discrimination is stark. And yes, segregation and control is a main part of this system of oppression and domination that amounts to Israel's apartheid against Palestinians.
And I suppose the issue of right to return, if you're Jewish and you're anywhere in the world, you can come back to Israel with open arms. But if you're Palestinian, you don't enjoy the same rights.
Absolutely. There are over 6 million Palestinian refugees who were forcibly displaced in 1948 and again in 1967, who are denied the right of return. Many of them still live in refugee camps in horrendous circumstances and situation. And so if you're Jewish anywhere, as you said, anywhere around the world, there's the law of return that allows you to come to Israel and receive Israeli citizenship upon arrival. Right when you arrive, there's no process, you become an Israeli citizen. While Palestinians who are kicked out of their homes are not allowed and continuously denied their right to return. This is another main pillar of the system, because allowing Palestinians to return means that the demography that intend to maintain demographic hegemony by Jewish Israelis will be no longer there. And therefore, this is why in our report, we document, including by analyzing the body of laws, policies, and practices with regards to Palestinian refugees, how this is a main pillar of Israel's apartheid system against Palestinians.
So my question to you is, what's new in this report? Because a lot of what you're saying really has been since 1948, more especially post-1967. This has been the story. What do we get more from this report, or are you just reminding us of the scenario that's been playing out for decades?
No, the report provides legal analysis. It uses international law, how apartheid was codified in international law as a crime against humanity in analyzing the situation. But you're right. Amnesty put out this report after Human Rights Watch put out a report saying that Israel is committing the crime against of apartheid, against humanity of apartheid against Palestinians. B'Tselem and other Israeli organizations have done so before Human Rights Watch. And it's very important to note that Palestinian human rights organizations have been saying and using this framework of analysis for more than 20 years now. What is important about Amnesty coming out of this now is that we complete the consensus among the international human rights movement working on the human rights situation in Israel and Palestine by saying that Israel is imposing a system of apartheid against Palestinians that amounts to a crime against humanity that has no place in our world, and this is a turning point. This consensus is now being pushed by us and others working in partnership. We're mobilizing our membership so that it spreads, so that now states also recognize the situation for what it is. We have recognition among civil society organizations. Now we want states to recognize the situation for what it is, because there's a not only moral obligation on states to act against a crime against humanity, but there's a legal obligation for states to do so. Very important that we have this consensus now, and it is a turning point. And from here on, it is basically saying how we, working together with other partner organizations, pushing states, will dismantle this system of oppression and domination that amounts to apartheid.
All right, and then perhaps finally, Tel Aviv will say, hang on, Israel has a right to exist, and the reason we have all of these extreme measures is because we're facing rockets every single day, and that if we relax the rules, people would come into Israel and kill us all.
The security argument has been used by Israel to justify its oppression, systematic oppression against Palestinians. Israel, as any state, has a right to maintain security, its security, and the security of everybody that lives under its control. That means also the security of Palestinians. But what we have is that a system that basically allows for the domination of one racial group, here Jewish Israelis, over Palestinians, that has no justification in security. It has justification in the intent to maintain this system of oppression and domination by one racial group over another. The checkpoints, the separation of families. Like me, for example, I'm a Palestinian citizen of Israel. My partner is a Palestinian from the West Bank. According to Israeli laws, I'm not able to pass my legal status to her. She's not allowed to become an Israeli citizen. This does not apply to Jewish Israelis. This means, like, for example, our children are only registered to me, not to her. They cannot travel with her. That also means that she cannot travel to visit with me family who live in Jerusalem without applying to a permit. To apply to a permit, she'll need to go and do an interrogation at the Israel Security Agency, which is many times degrading, humiliating, and can be actually a threat and a danger to Palestinians applying for a permit. This does not apply to Jewish Israelis. There is no security justification when it comes to separation of family, the restriction on the freedom of movement, the segregation of Palestinians, the building of walls, the confiscation, the discriminatory confiscation of land, and not allowing access to them. Palestinian citizens of Israel, for example, like myself, are denied access to 80% of land inside of Israel. And this is only because we are Palestinian. Jewish Israelis do not face the same thing. There is no security justification for this system of oppression and domination. It is apartheid. It's a crime against humanity.
Saleh, we'll leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed for giving us some insights into this report, which I think everybody ought to read. Is this going to be available on your website?
Yes, absolutely. It's available in a number of languages. We also have a human rights education course available online that takes audiences through a journey, educational journey about what apartheid is under international law, how apartheid came about in history with a comparative view of South Africa and Palestine and Myanmar, which is another situation Amnesty found there is apartheid, and then also the Palestinian experience under apartheid. So there's a report, a human rights education course, and many other materials available online.
Saleh, thank you very, very much indeed, and good luck with your launch tomorrow. Take care. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that's Saleh Hijazi talking to us about Amnesty International's latest report on Israel being an apartheid state. And you can go onto their website, download this report, read it for yourself and get an understanding of what's going on in the Middle East.
Okay. So at this point, I'm hoping that Dave Sutton, you will add the resources into the chat box. And I'd like to ask Dove Baum to speak about what she wants to share at this point, to start a conversation. You've just been there.
Yeah, so I'm here with my colleague Alison, and maybe Alison will start by telling you more about the campaign we're just about to launch, Apartheid-Free Communities, and then I will say a few words about our experiences in the trip we just came back from, and then we'll open it up for conversation.
That's great.
All right, it's good to be here, and I thank you for taking seriously the charge of apartheid and acknowledging the realities that folks like Maria are living with every day. Maria, you gave us a real tangible face to some of the barriers that you face on a daily basis, and I thank you for that. And I know that this is your third session. Many of you have been exploring the realities of apartheid. So I really want to focus on what do we do about this? Apartheid is evil. It was evil in South Africa. It was evil in the Jim Crow South, and it's evil in Israel. However, we are in a moment in time, and the speaker in the video really called attention to this. We are in a moment of time where there is consensus among every major human rights organization internationally that the on-the-ground realities in Palestine and Israel constitute apartheid. And this is nothing new for Palestinians. Palestinians have been saying this since 1948, but there's a growing affirmation of what Palestinians have long been saying. And Palestinians have offered a recent call to folks in the international community in light of this recognition of consensus of the apartheid realities that they're living in. Palestinian civil society has reached out to the international world to say, can you create apartheid-free zones? Can you create places that work intentionally to separate themselves from Israeli apartheid in every way they can and actively work to end apartheid? And you couple with that, Palestinian Christians have offered a very similar request to the international Christian community to say, if the salvific presence of God is going to be in our midst, then God must be incarnated in the international community standing with us. And so Palestinian Christians have written a dossier on Israeli apartheid, again, very specifically to the Christian community, looking at theological and biblical and gospel responses to apartheid. And in response to the Palestinian Christian plea and invitation and the Palestinian Civil Society invitation, an interfaith community from across the country got together and said, we want to create an apartheid-free congregations network, an apartheid-free community in which churches and congregations and faith communities and communities of conscience take a pledge to become one of these apartheid-free spaces. And this is a pledge. In a minute, I'll show you the pledge, but what does this pledge mean? First of all, it's a pledge to name Israeli apartheid. We've seen the realities, but do we have the prophetic voice to name it publicly? Second, it's a pledge to take action in your community, to work to end Israeli apartheid. Now, what does that action look like? That will vary from community to community, and we intentionally don't want to say there's a one-size-fits-all. But if your community hasn't explored apartheid, then educating yourselves and studying it is really important. If your community has but hasn't done anything to educate your larger community. That's important. If your community is ready to do some advocacy work, we have advocacy campaigns that you can be a part of. If your community is ready to divest from Israeli apartheid, hallelujah, we will help equip you to do that. There are so many ways that you can get involved. And third, the pledge allows you to participate in a network really throughout North America of communities that are working together, both supporting one another and living out the pledge, and encouraging and kind of pushing one another to say, here's what we're doing. Is there anyone else doing something like this? How can we pool our voices and work together? Signing the pledge is one powerful way that we can participate in nonviolent, active resistance to apartheid in deep solidarity with Palestinian people who have long been working for their own liberation. And let me, on that front, go ahead and show you our website and the Apartheid Free Pledge. And I'm going to ask if I could have permission to share screen. Oh, great. Our website is apartheid-free.org. And it'll be in the chat and it'll be sent out to you later. But our website comes with the basic premise that all people are equal and should be treated with dignity and respect. And we have 3 separate sections on the website. 1, learn, education, which you've already been engaged in. 2, take the pledge. And then 3, take action. Let's go ahead and take a look at the pledge itself. We tried to keep the pledge very focused and very succinct. The pledge says, we affirm our commitment to freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinian people and all people. We oppose all forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and oppression, and we declare ourselves an apartheid-free community. And to that end, we join others in working to end all support to Israel's apartheid regime, settler colonialism, and military occupation. So that's the pledge, acknowledging what we believe, acknowledging what we oppose, declaring ourselves in an aspirational way, in a way in which we will strive to be and need to fully live into, but declaring ourselves apartheid-free and pledging to join others in this work. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to go back to our homepage and move over to the action section, just to let you know when your community is ready to take this pledge, what does it look like? And I've already mentioned that the pledge is aspirational. It's something we live into, and it's something that almost every year we can revisit our commitment and say, what's the next step we should be taking? What's the next thing that we can do? We provide basic ideas. Be creative with this pledge. Think through how might your community gain life and energy from engaging in living it out. Focus your efforts to one specific act and then go from there. You don't have to do every action right away, but what can you do? And so if you go to faith communities, again, educate your congregation in naming apartheid. And here we highly recommend the dossier on Israeli apartheid written by Kairos Palestine, in a Christian group of Palestinians and their international counterparts. We give you a number of ways throughout the liturgical year to lift up Palestine. We encourage you to educate your community and raise awareness. And that can be from putting a placard outside your church, much like Black Lives Matter, that says we are an apartheid-free church, we're an apartheid-free community, to traveling to the Holy Land and seeing for yourself. If you look here, there are a variety of different ways to engage in advocacy. We invite you to check out, if you are a denomination, what your denominational group might suggest. And, the United Church of Christ Palestine Israel Network has its own very good suggestions, but you could also join a specific advocacy campaign like No Way to Cheat a Child or Not on Our Dime. You can engage in economic activism through joining a corporate accountability campaign, and if you're ready, you can begin to look to actually divesting from apartheid. Again, we've created this spectrum of ways to get involved, recognizing that they kind of build on each other, and wherever you're at, what makes sense to you, take that step. And then as you take that step, see how more and more people might get involved and how you might be able to take another step. The last thing that I want to say about our apartheid-free communities platform is that just as we realize we are in a moment when there's growing consensus that Israel is an apartheid reality, we recognize that there's a specific role for people of faith to play in this moment. And if you look at the history of South Africa, faith communities, churches in particular, played a very specific role in helping name apartheid in South Africa. And when the churches were able to do that, that forced politicians to say what's happening in South Africa isn't just a political situation, it's a moral situation. And the churches really forced the politicians to discuss it and kept pushing. And it's that type of historic precedent that we're tapping into. And I want to finally say a word. This apartheid-free communities, we began by bringing together Christian organizations, a variety of different mainline denominations, but very quickly our Jewish partners were eager to get on board, our Muslim partners were eager to get on board, our Buddhist partners and our interfaith partners have all signed the pledge in one way or another. And so this is just a very exciting moment in which people of faith and people of conscience are responding and say, we see what's happening, we need to do something, we want to take a pledge and be part of this network throughout North America so that we can work together to live it out and do what we can to end our ties with Israeli apartheid.
Thank you, Alison. I don't have much to add. Alison presented our campaign and our main call for action, which is join the pledge. Join the pledge as UCC Ainsworth. Join the pledge as any one of the communities or organizations that you are part of. You can be part of any community organization that can sign the pledge. Only organizations and groups and communities can sign the pledge, not individuals. This is not a petition, because this is an attempt to build an anti-apartheid movement. And those communities and organizations that sign the pledge actually join for the long haul. They are joining us in an attempt to create collective power that can join initiatives and campaigns down the line, that can bring more effort and collective force to influence decision makers down the line. And it can be decision makers in government, it can be corporate policy decision makers, it can be decision makers on all levels. Because we understand deeply that what is going on in Palestine today is enjoying the impunity and the longevity and the immense political and economic support it enjoys coming from this country, coming from the United States. I will take a moment just to add in my own perspective, maybe it's helpful, and then open it up for you all. I myself, I'm an Israeli Jew. I was an active member of the Israeli movement against the occupation for many years, up until about 12 years ago when I moved to the US. I started a project called Who Profits from the Occupation back in 2005, following the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So I've spent a lot of years studying the system of support, mostly corporate and economic support to the Israeli occupation. Alison and I just came back from a delegation to Palestine last week. We were on the same flight last week coming back. I was there for about 3 weeks, and Of course, I've been visiting very regularly for the last few years, so it's not an unusual visit. And just as we heard from Maria just before we started the webinar, the situation is extremely bleak. People are very much discouraged, and the level of violence is staggering. It's very, very scary. I've been telling folks that I signed up for a WhatsApp service that sends me news from Palestine every couple of days, what's happening, and I find it hard to even read it. And I thought at first that I would translate it and send it around on social media for more people to know, but I can't bring myself to doing that because it's too much. It's overwhelming. From the beginning of the year, 117 Palestinians were killed by the occupation. From the beginning of May, 21 people were killed. 3,887 injured. 340 structures were destroyed. 479 Palestinians lost their homes. Every year in the West Bank, there are about 1,000 children who are arrested. Another 1,000 in East Jerusalem. Together, 2,000 children arrested every year. 4 of any 5 children in the Gaza Strip are reporting suffering from depression and anxiety. And over 50% of them have considered suicide. There are every week, every weekend, we hear in the news about hundreds of thousands of Israelis that go out to the streets demonstrating against their own regime, calling for democracy. And I find that exciting. And at the same time, those hundreds of thousands of Israelis out in the streets call for democracy for the Jews. And very, very few of them actually remember that there is no democracy for about half of the people living under the Israeli regime, who are Palestinian. So we are in a situation where the question is not whether or not this is apartheid. That is not the question. And I actually refuse to participate in arguments and debates about what to call it. I don't care what we call it. I don't think anybody cares what we call it. Let's call it kohlrabi. But it is a human disaster. That is a human-made human disaster. And it includes illegal military occupation that has been going on since 1948. It includes settler colonialism and a very active way in which communities are being driven out of their homes today. After all these decades, this is ongoing. We have visited them. We have visited them in the occupied West Bank, and we have visited them inside what is called the State of Israel. Inside the Green Line, it's the same technologies, it's the same methodologies, it's the same systems of dispossession and oppression that are enacted by the Israeli government. It's many times also the same soldiers. So it's all of the above, and it is apartheid. And it requires its own name. You know, the system of oppression in South Africa was called apartheid, and it was a system. And the Israeli system also deserves its own name. And I really don't care what we call it. But we have to recognize that it has been going on for decades. It has been getting worse and worse and worse. And it is tugging on the strings of our hearts as a form of grave injustice that is destroying millions of lives every day. And we have to take action. And we have to take action because we are complicit. We don't have to take action because we want to keep our hands clean. That is never going to happen. Our hands are not clean. Speaking as an Israeli, my hands are not clean, but we are all American citizens. This is also on us. So what are we going to do? And the answer is everything. Let's do everything. And let's start with what we can do, because otherwise it's overwhelming. So the first invitation is to join a movement. And this is one way into that movement, the Apartheid Free Communities campaign. Sign the pledge as a community. If your community is not ready to sign the pledge, use that as a tool to start a conversation with your community in order to get people on board to sign the pledge. We want to be apartheid free. That is what the pledge says. And it is a pledge not to call it apartheid. It is a pledge to cut our ties to apartheid, should join others in stopping our support to apartheid, which is the minimum we can do. It's the least we can do. So I will pause here, and I see the pledge. Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing it. You can also see it on the website, apartheid-free.org. I will pause here, and maybe we'll go to the questions in the chat, or whatever questions you all have. Let's think about what we can do.
So Beverly, what have you found in the chat for questions for our friends here?
Well, first off, thank you, Dov and Allison. Those were excellent, excellent talks.
Yes.
I really appreciated hearing from both of you. We have one question that says, what gives you hope? What keeps you going?
I want to, if I may, I want to push against that. You know, I've been giving talks in the US as an activist and as a researcher who's been researching what's happening in Palestine for a long time now. And often I get this question. I sometimes get it in the end of the talk. Yes, what gives you hope? And I think that Americans are very used to the feel-good ending. You know, we end with film, or there should be like a feel-good ending for the film, and we're really kind of accustomed to that. And Palestine, you know, it doesn't feel good. And I don't think it should feel good right now. I think we should really feel bad about it. What gives us hope? First of all, there are millions of people who live under very difficult conditions and have their basic freedoms, and they have to live this way. They don't have a choice. So of course they live their lives, and there are joys in their lives, and there is hope and creativity and beauty and community, and we can look at all that and admire their tenacity and their sumud and their commitment to life and to joy, and draw hope from that. But really, isn't that really weird that we should draw our hope from that? So the only answer I can give is that being an activist gives me hope, because that means that I'm trying to be an agent in the world, and I hope all of us are. But I also think it's okay to feel yucky about it.
Thank you. Diana?
Thank you, Dov, for your honesty on that. I thought the same thing. I have a question in the chat, but I have another one, so I would rather speak it than just write it. As I look through your actions that after the pledge, and the descriptions of the varieties of things that we can do, they all look, like very doable kinds of things to do. But I notice that everything is aimed at the Palestinian people. Now, they need a lot of support, and they need a lot of things happening. But I wondered what kind, and I guess, Dov, to you in particular, being an Israeli Palestinian, isn't Israel the problem? I mean, well, the regime. I don't mean, I've always held out a lot of hope for the peace movement that was in Israel, I mean, at least in the past. And I appreciate your saying that there are Israelis who, and you worked with the Israeli women against the occupation. I've always felt like there were people in Israel who, Jews in Israel, who really understood the issues and problems and were opposed to them. And I'm wondering, are there any actions that, or does anybody talk about how could we affect Israel? I mean, as opposed to, I mean, not just removing money, which would be a big thing, especially our money. So I totally agree about divestment, but other things, the ways that we can either support the movement against the occupation within Israel itself, or to make our positions known to Israelis so that they know if the world is watching that, and that they need to change their way of life.
Thank you, Diana. I appreciate it. I'm a member of a group of Israelis, which is called Boycott from Within. We have several hundreds members who have signed publicly a call to support the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And just like white South Africans during South African
Yes.
apartheid, we realized that there is absolutely no way for us to have any impact on the inside, whether on Israeli public opinion or on Israeli money interests or on Israeli decision makers in government without support from the outside. We need
Yes.
support. And we ask for your support in the way of cutting your support of the Israeli right wing, of the Israeli racist regime, and
Yes.
Israeli industries of occupation and apartheid. Because what happens is Israel is a very small country,
Mm-hmm.
much smaller than South Africa. It's
Mm-hmm.
not very self-sufficient. The only reason that these systems of control continue for so long is because they are
Mm-hmm.
immensely supported by the West, not just the US, but also the EU and European governments.
Mm-hmm.
And the minimum request coming from within, from Israelis, and in support of the Palestinian leadership of the movement, because it is a movement to liberate Palestine, is to stop the support of those Israeli right wing. And that includes Christian Zionism, which is the largest backer of the right wing and Netanyahu's party and Netanyahu's ruling.
Yes.
And that means a huge shaking up of thinking about Christianity here in the US.
Yes.
What is Israel? Yes.
Right.
And it also includes cutting US military aid and cutting the tax breaks for settler organizations. And it also means that cutting the normalization of Israeli culture and Israeli everything.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever an Israeli dance group comes to your town, pick it outside. Tell them, no, we're not going to this performance. This is not business as usual. Don't shop in Israeli businesses. Don't buy Israeli products, and don't invest in companies that directly support the Israeli apartheid, even if they are American companies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to ask. There is a lot of work cut out for us.
Does your organization, can I follow up with, do you have a website where we can learn some of these pieces of action that you just described? Because I do agree absolutely that these are things that we can do that might have an impact. And I appreciate again your honesty about the lack of hope to change, Netanyahu. And especially now with the right wing becoming so dominant in Israel itself. So that's very frightening to me to see that.
I will post in the chat some links.
Thank you.
Also, apartheidfree.org, Diana. That's the organization that these two folks are working on, apartheidfree.org.
Yeah, it has a list of all the different organizations and who we invest in, and
It does.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Catherine.
I also want to add, so I'm a sociologist by trade, and the power of actually naming Israeli apartheid and naming that in the public sphere is very significant in challenging this Israel dominant, pro-Israel mentality that's taking place in the United States. And one of the things that I, at its most basic, and I want to move to all the things that Dov said, but at its most basic, to put a sign that says "End Israeli Apartheid" up in the window of your church, of your home, in the public sphere is extremely powerful, because that seldom gets said. And there's no question that it's apartheid for anyone who's done their homework, and almost no one who hasn't done their homework would it even dawn on them if you live in the United States, because that's so antithetical to the message that comes from politicians, from the media, everywhere, and so from the TV. So normalizing the reality that apartheid fits what's happening is extremely important as a reclaiming of truth.
So we have another question, and it said that an earlier speaker said that the peace talks are not real, rather a fig leaf to cover continued Israeli domination. Do you agree?
I want to start with the current situation. And it's always good when people want to argue history to go back to the facts of what's happening. There are no peace talks right now, and there haven't been peace talks for several years now. So let's start with that. I mean, we can debate what happened in the 90s, but the 90s were the 90s. We are now in the 2020s. And the Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been in power for so long, have made very, very clear statements about how they will not allow for a Palestinian state to exist, how Israel itself is the state of the Jewish people. That's one of their main statements. They have the new law, the Israeli national law. What does it mean? For 20% of the citizenry, of the citizens of the state of Israel who are not Jewish. If this is a Jewish state, what would you feel if the US declared itself a Christian state? You know, as Christians, what does it mean for non-Christians? Would that be okay? What would it mean if in the country where you live, white people and non-white people would not be allowed to get married? This is a state in Israel. Jews and non-Jews are not able to get married. If they are married abroad, their marriages are recognized by the Israeli law. But in Israel, they cannot legally get married. Okay, we're talking about a very extreme type of Jewish supremacy. Now, it sounds weird in the US frame of mind, because in the US, Judaism is seen as a religion, and just that, a religion, and not just that, but a religion minority, and a minority that suffered from oppression for so many years, still suffers from bigotry and anti-Semitism in this country. Israel, where I grew up, and the way I grew up, Judaism was a nationality and an ethnicity. It is seen also as a racial identity. And Palestinians are racialized as a racial minority. It sounds odd in the US context, but it is the way it is in my country. That's the way it is. And Jews are the majority and the ruling majority and the hegemony. So many times when you speak in the Israeli frame of mind, Jewish means white. It doesn't mean that same thing in the US. But in Israel, that's what it means. Okay? So when you're asking about a peace process, we need to specify what this is about. Yes, in the 90s, there was a peace process. It got a lot of publicity. I supported it then. I was very happy about it. I was a young, enthusiastic, optimistic person like many other people living in this country. And it took me a while to realize that it was hijacked, or maybe it was completely disingenuous from the start. I don't know what people actually meant when they were running with it. But I know that it didn't produce peace, it produced more oppression. During the years of the peace process, Israel has doubled the number of settlers in the occupied territories, you know, and enacted a permit regime that made it even harder for Palestinians to move or to exercise any kind of freedom of movement. That's what happened. And the Gaza Strip was put under blockade until this very day. And the settlers that were taken out of the Gaza Strip, which seemed like a big achievement at the time because they left the Gaza Strip, they all settled inside mixed cities inside Israel. And now in our latest tour, now coming back from Israel, Palestine, Alison and I, we visited communities inside Israel that are mixed Jewish Palestinian communities that used to be kind of the hope for coexistence and co-living in co-shared cities. And this is where the settlers from Gaza have settled. And now they are doing the same there as they did in the Gaza Strip or in the West Bank. And they are enacting a system of oppression and dispossession and extreme racism and violence in the streets. And I'm talking about lynchings. People in the Palestinians walking in the street are afraid of lynching. It's unbelievable. So what peace process? What peace process would be my question? I don't know. I mean, there is no peace. I mean, nobody thinks there is a peace process, so it's no longer even a debate.
So I just want to say one thing that I learned before I went there, that peace process was like two men sitting down to eat a pizza and talking about the peace process. Let's divide the land up while one man eats the pizza. That's what it's like. So that the land disappears as one man eats the pizza.
You know, I deeply believe in partial solutions. I really love the idea of compromise. I think that when people live together and different people of different ethnicities and different religions, and they all have to compromise and be uncomfortable. And that is a good thing. It's normal. That's how we live as humans together. But there is not even a talk of that anymore. You know, it's not even an insufficient process. There is no process. There is no incentive for a process even. The whole idea of creating international pressure on Israel is to create an incentive for a peace process, which doesn't exist right now.
Beverly, do you have another question for us? Oh, can't hear you, hon.
Maria put something in the chat, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but she said, please, how can I get 5 free signs that say, come see for yourself?
I wrote her back saying, let's talk offline, off this line, and we can negotiate how we can do that. I can help her with that.
Okay. And then there's another question about what about the growth of secular Judaism, even within Israel, and or the increased power of Orthodox Jews in Israel?
Well, Zionism, the national movement of the national Judaism movement that started in the late 19th century was essentially a secular movement. You know, as I said, it's a little confusing for folks in the US who think of Judaism merely as a religion. But I grew up as a deeply secular Jew in a very, very secular environment. And my parents actually supported opposing parties. My mom supported like socialist Zionist parties, and my father was a revisionist Zionist, right-wing Likud type Zionism. And they were both deeply secular. And I think third generation secular. It wasn't something new in their families. But they were both deeply Zionist. And they both deeply supported creating a Jewish state and pushing out Palestinians as much as possible and maintaining Jewish supremacy by limiting the growth of Palestinian communities, pushing them out, and using all the different systems that we have seen in our visit just recently of how communities are being pushed out. That was their politics. What we see in latest years, and we see that also among Palestinians, and I think we see it among Christians around the world, we see the rise of fundamentalist religion everywhere. And we see it also in Israel among Jews. And we also see the new kind of formation of a new front between secular nationalist Zionist Judaism, like Beitar or the Likud movement, Netanyahu's old party, and even the ultra-Orthodox in Israel that traditionally were not very interested in politics and definitely not very Zionist. That is no longer the case. There is kind of an alignment of interests that brings the ultra-Orthodox Jews into the camp of the right wing and kind of breaks the 50-50 even political split in Israel in favor of the right wing. It's not a great development, but these are things that happen now, and they can change and shift. It's an alignment of mainly economic interests that happen right now. We see a rise of Jewish religious fundamentalism in Israel that is very political and very right-wing and very settler-oriented, and I think we see it in the US as well. And these two movements are very much aligned. This is what we need to deal with. I have a question to you all, if we are in the Q&A. I don't know if I may.
Sure.
So Alison has presented very clearly our call for action. Getting communities and mainly congregations, but all communities and organizations to sign this pledge. And I wanted to ask each and every one of you, if you know of groups, organizations, congregations that you think are low-hanging fruit that might be able to move forward and sign this pledge soon.
In Ainsworth's situation, we're bringing it to council very soon, and then hopefully taking the pledge to the congregation if council agrees to it. It'll be the end of June.
July.
Oh.
The fourth Sunday of July.
I beg your pardon, the fourth Sunday of July. So it'll be down the road a bit.
I was going to say that the United Church of Christ churches in our conference, some of them I'm sure some of them are very much into this and very supportive already. Some know about it. Some are related to the PIN network, Palestine-Israel network. And then maybe there are some others who have been very justice oriented that would be willing to look and go the journey for it.
We need your help with that, Lynn. Naming those churches, that would help us. The CPC PIN group.
Hillsborough for one.
Yes.
But yeah.
Leslie's on that, and we do have a couple of members from there.
Okay.
But we're a small group, so we don't necessarily know those other churches that are very much into justice work.
Sure.
That would help.
I'll share that with you.
That's great.
Yeah.
What about EMO? Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. I mean, if you're looking at just religious organizations, I thought you meant of other organizations or communities that were part. I thought that's what your question was. But if they're thinking religious ones,
Anyone.
EMO might be a good place to start, since it's a wide variety of faith traditions, right, Lynn, and EMO?
Yes, I'm not sure they would be willing to tackle this, but
might not.
It's a new era at EMO, so that could be very possible. I know that they shied away from some things, and Palestine, Israel was one a while back, but they have a new director, they have a new board, things have changed.
Yeah. And if the ask is around beginning education, it's on the topic. It seems to me that's a pretty, I mean, if some groups don't want to learn, I mean, they wouldn't have to, but anyway, that I was thinking of outside of religious organizations.
So I'm on the board of EMO, and I'm the chair of the Public Policy Commission board. So
Good.
yeah.
So take it to them, Cecil. Good. I would also think that the Muslim Educational Trust would be very much
Yeah.
involved and want to be, and also with their partners in the community. They have lots of
Yes,
connections
they
for
do.
over 3 counties and at least. And they certainly would would be very supportive.
Are you all interested in political parties or political organizations? You are? Oh,
Any, right?
I think the point is that we're starting with faith organizations, but the interest was such that we opened it up to all kinds of organizations.
right, right.
And so the answer is yes, yes, and yes.
Thank you. You're a good organizer.
In fact, from those who have signed, we're kind of grouping the congregations, and then the faith communities far beyond congregations, and then communities of conscience. And yeah, the more we try to constrain, this is who we want, the more other people want to join. And one, who are we to say no to that? But two, I feel a very biblical connection to, when Jesus went around and he would heal someone and he would say, don't tell anyone. And, or he would go here and he said, let's not make a big deal about this right now. And of course, no one could keep silent. And the word just kept spreading way beyond what it appeared as if he was quite ready for. And I feel some similarity in the excitement and energy around people being eager to sign this pledge and be part of the network. So yes, any of your connections, any of your partnerships or communities that you are networked with, I encourage them to check out the website. Let them know that if they want educational resources, we have them available, and push them to at least engage in the discussion and hopefully sign the pledge when they're ready.
Allison, is there any union connection yet?
Not yet.
That's another area.
Historically, unions in this country were kind of a difficult challenge. Unlike in Europe, the Palestine Solidarity Movement in Europe has had great gains with European unions, but in the US, historically, it's been a really hard struggle. The larger unions have historical deep connections with the Israeli Histadrut, which is the Association of Unions in Israel, and structural, good, deep connections. And it was just very hard to go around that. So any kind of union connections, I know there is now a new organizing of union activists for Palestinian rights that are trying to break some of those barriers. So any kind of connections would be, I think, very helpful for these young organizers.
We were having conversations with campuses, apartheid-free campuses and apartheid-free cities. But I do want to, in addition to all these groups that can and should, and we hope engage in this process, churches have a very unique responsibility in this because of the way in which Christianity has been weaponized through Christian Zionism, and by the way in which Christian hegemony in the United States really controls what's happening. I mean, Jewish folks get blamed for what's happening in Israel, but Christian Zionists outnumber Jews in this country 10 to 1. I mean, and the Christian nationalism that's rampant in this country, I've heard it described that Christian nationalism is a domestic policy, where Christian Zionism really is the foreign policy of Christian nationalists. And so Christians have our work to do to reclaim Christianity and to undo things that are being wrongfully done in our name.
Can I ask, COFU, isn't that the group that, can you describe that? And do you know when they're meeting?
CUFI, Christians United for Israel, is the largest pro-Israel organization in the country. They are extremely powerful and damning in their faith. I can't tell you when they're meeting though, but they have chapters all over the country. And again, there's this need to reclaim a Christianity that cares about justice, that cares about Palestine, that cares about challenging injustice on every front.
I just have wondered about going to that with a group of people who really disagree with what they're doing in terms of supporting settlements and disrupting their big convention by having people outside at least.
Absolutely.
To make noise.
The most prophetic experience I've ever had was being in Washington, D.C. Friends of Sabeel North America organized a disruptive rally against Christians United for Israel, and they were able to disrupt Mike Pence when he was giving opening remarks, and it was profoundly biblical.
I get it. I've wondered about that. We'll have to find out when that is. They do it once a year, is my understanding. So,
is that the group that Netanyahu talked to?
Absolutely.
CUFI, not KOFU. Okay.
I thought you were talking about tofu.
No, it's not tofu. I just had forgotten. That's why I wanted to know.
Or maybe it was kohlrabi.
I didn't get that reference. What is that reference, Allison?
No,
oh, that was Dove. What did you mean by that?
Pick a name, any name.
I meant that I've spent several of my years in academia, and I have been in many academic discussions about the definition of this or that. And when it comes to Israeli apartheid, I'm often also invited to conversations about the definitions of international law and how do we prove to other legal scholars that this is indeed apartheid. And then there is a discussion in of whether or not if this should be termed primarily apartheid or primarily settler colonialism. And if, and what about the fact that it is also occupation, and that's not exactly apartheid. And to this, I come with an activist approach, which is not so academic, and I say, shh, we have a long list of all the mainstream human rights organizations calling it apartheid. So that's good enough for me. And we have the mainstream of all human rights organizations and legal scholars calling it a military occupation. That's good enough for me. And I have a long list of historians and scholars who call it settler colonialism. That's good enough for me. And I don't think the conversation is about what to call it. And that's when I said, let's call it kohlrabi. I don't care what we call it. Let's give it a name. Let's not get hung up on the academic conversations. That's what I meant.
So
I'm supporting it. Yes.
Yeah, just get the action going. I have a very weird view on this, I think, and y'all will hate this probably, but I think the darker it gets, there is more hope, because the darker it gets, the worse it gets. It is in the news more and more and more. I mean, I started this work, 2006. It wasn't in the news at all, except all support of Israel. Israel's lovely. Oh, those Palestinians did another bombing of something. That's all you would hear, but that is not the case any longer. It has changed somewhat. So the darker it gets, the more it's in the news, and the Palestinians are spoken about, at least somewhat. On MSNBC, I hear it favorably spoken about it. So
maybe
Dove, shoot that one down.
No, I'm not shooting it down. I'm just suggesting that we will reframe it, what you just said.
Okay.
I think we, as privileged people living in very comfortable conditions, should not hope for the darker situation for people who are suffering so much. I mean, that's That's
Of course not. Of course not.
it's too Marxist even for me, you know. I really think that there are some opportunities now that we hear people on the Hill being able to speak for Palestinian rights for the first time in so many years, that we hear progressives who can actually speak for Palestinian rights with more authority and with more influence than ever before. Yes. And I think that we should take these opportunities and we should make the most of them. This is our job. And why are these opportunities now? There is a whole list of reasons why. And one of them might be also the rise of the fundamentalist right in this country and the deepening understanding of the connections between the right here and the right there. Or maybe looking at what's happening in Israel with the rise of dictatorship to the Jews, not just to Palestinians, you know. The realization also among American Jews who are progressives that Israel does not represent their values. That's something that was very hard for American Jews to realize, I think, until recently. So
Yes.
that creates some opportunities for us to reach out to more people and to get them to know more and to care more, and therefore we should do this work.
I also want to lift up that one of the East Jerusalemite guides that we learned from, and we were hearing a variety of responses from different folks we'd met that had been in the trenches for decades. And one East Jerusalemite said, "What happens after apartheid? One of two things. After apartheid, either comes genocide or peace." And that put the starkness of what's happening really in my mind and the urgency of working for peace. And that gets to the question of hope too. You can hope for peace, you can work for peace, but there are two ways it could go, and it's really ugly right now.
I just was able to see when the next, oh, I don't know what that is. The Kufi, got it right, meeting is July 18th. I didn't see, I quickly looked at when it was, and it's July 18th. I don't know where. But let's see, who put that in there? Cecil put it in there. The summit is July 18th through the 21st, I believe it said.
Here in Arlington.
It's in Arlington, Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay. Huh.
That's too bad. Could I ask, well, I'm thinking about the anti-Semitism that is rampant in the United States right now, particularly pushed by the Christian nationalists and the right wing, the combination, as you said, Dov, very succinctly. And I can only see that. I'm trying to understand how that fits into this picture. Because I know I have Jewish friends who are sort of lying low. They're not very, willing to be sort of out there out of fear. Understandable. But how does that go together? Like for someone who is Christian like myself, I do have Jewish relatives, but nobody knows about that except me. So, although I almost put a Jewish sign on my door, and then I thought, oh, Diana, it affects everybody. It ripples out, this sort of anxiety about everything. And we're far away, right, from the real danger that you all observe. We're very distant and protected. But
Diana, what's your question? Because we're running out of time.
Oh, I'm trying to, I don't know what my question is.
Okay. Huh.
But I'm trying to understand how it affects advocating for Palestinians in the light of anti-Semitism.
Okay.
It's a crucial question, as we all know. We've all, I'm sure, dealt with it in different levels. The pledge is opposing racism and bigotry of all types, including Islamophobia, including anti-Semitism, and we take it very seriously. There is anti-Semitism in this country. So when we take the pledge and we pledge to take action, we should be very clear that we are also doing everything we can to oppose anti-Semitism. And we also know that anti-Semitism has been weaponized
Yes.
by Zionists to silence any voices of criticism of the Israeli state or
Yes.
or oppression of Palestinians, or any mention of Palestinian rights is also many times silenced as a form of anti-Semitism. That is false. That is a way to distort history. And in a way, it is anti-Semitic in its own right, because not holding Israel to the same standards as we hold all states of the world is exactly a type of anti-Semitism. And so when you all speak as Christians, or as even a Christian congregation or a Christian community, it is crucially important that you speak with a very, very deep prophetic voice that is clearly opposed to anti-Semitism and bigotry of all types. And it is a deep soul-searching process that you need to know and where you're coming from. If you're speaking out of hatred, or if you're speaking out of love. And if you know that you're speaking out of love, then when you are opposed with the charge of anti-Semitism, you know how to answer to it.
Thank you. That does address what I'm thinking about.
I always think about it as love of the people who are, they're tied up in something that's so awful. The Israelis, the kids are being asked to do things that are horrendous. And actually this work tries to free them from that kind of being an oppressor. That's a terrible thing to be as an 18-year-old.
It is true, and I speak that way as an Israeli. I'm actually working for the future of my own people and out of love to my own people. And when you speak as a white Christian person from the United States, I think you should speak about liberating yourself as an oppressor. You know, taking your own complicity in this horrendous regime. And that is genuine, yes?
That's a wonderful addition. I think we need to call this meeting to a close, but it has just absolutely been wonderful. And I want to thank Dov and Allison for being with us, and also Dave Sutton and Dave Nichols and Beverly Pertu for managing the pieces that have made it work. It's been a wonderful series, so I hope that we will get to share this out with the conference and the churches that we've spoken of and the groups that we've spoken of, and see what we can get going.
And thank you, Catherine, again for organizing it, and for all our guests. I really appreciate you all being here.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for coming tonight as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Maria,
Catherine. Thank you so much. I confirm for you on the ground, we are in the darkness of all time. Don't worry. We are in the darkness of all time, in my experience since 1983.
And maybe that will bring us hope. And I'll be online with you. We'll write each other about those signs, see what we can do.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.